The festive season is upon us, and at this time of the year, many adults go home to their parents for the holidays. For some, this brings joy and happy memories, and it can be also unsettling how quickly we fall back into old patterns when surrounded by loved ones, especially parents. To speak to us about that, we are joined by clinical social worker Andrew Kekae. Andrew, as we speak, I'm sure many people are actually already sitting in their parents' homes and can relate to this conversation as well. Do you find a greater sense of comfort or security when you're at home with your parents, at your parents' home, and if so, why?
Yeah, thank you so much, and good afternoon to you and to the viewers of Newzroom Afrika. I think going back home, it gives you a sense of comfort. It takes you back to a place where you grew up, and you are no longer as having a lot of responsibilities like when you are not at home. Your parents are there, and they are going to be making some decisions on your behalf. As a result of that, you are going to feel more comfortable and less stressed because you don't have to run around as if everything is evolving around you. You are going to retreat to the younger you.
Would you say that there are specific situations about being back home that will trigger this kind of regressive behavior? Is it things that our parents perhaps say? Is it when they're sending us around the house, and whether you are 9 years old, 29 years old, or 59 years old, you know, the rule is you're still a child under your parents' roof?
Yes. Look, when we talk about regression, we are referring to a situation of backwardness, or when you return to earlier stage of development, whether it's emotionally, it's mentally, or behaviorally. So what happened is when you go back home, you are going back to the environment where you are perceived as a child. So there is a conflict between how you perceive yourself as an adult and how your parents perceive you as a child. And the treatment thereof is going to be very confusing, because when you are not with your parents, you are perceiving and treating yourself like an adult, and the people around you, they treat you as an adult. But when you get back home, the environment on its own is also going to determine and influence your behavior. You are not going to behave as you will behave if you are not with your parents. But I also want to indicate that regression is also a trauma response. It will depend on your relationship with your parents, and if you never experienced any traumatic event with your parents, because, you know, according to the trauma researchers, they believe that things like places, scent, and sound can trigger emotions that you tried to bury many years ago. So when you go home and then you see that dining room, you see your parents, you hear the voices, they can trigger some of the stuff that you never professionally dealt with. And as a result, they will resurface, and then you will find yourself regressing and starting to behave younger than your age.
Is there a positive to this regression as well as we see it? Because you mentioned also, you know, being triggered by smell, being triggered by what you're seeing. But could these triggers also be positive, that you're back home, you're in a place that maybe is you perceive with a lot of love as well, and being coddled and being treated as a baby, maybe a bit of a relief from the year where you've been adulting and doing all sorts of grown-up stuff. So this is your one opportunity to be back in your parents' home, maybe back in your old bedroom, and this regression can also be seen as positive.
Yes, because now you are less stressed, you are in a safe space, you are in a space where you feel loved without terms and conditions. You feel completely safe because you are now under the protection and the care of your parents. And as a result of that, it is going to trigger a positive emotions, it's going to trigger positive thoughts. It will actually remind you of the good things that you used to do when you were still growing up in that same environment. So regression is not always negative. Sometimes it can be positive, but mostly we see the negative side of it because we don't have a lot of awareness around regression, and then we start to wonder when we see people's behavior changing, whether it's adults or it's children. They start to behave younger than their age, younger than their age emotionally and mentally. And because of lack of awareness around it, we start to punish the behavior instead of focusing on what is driving the behavior. Because when it comes to young adults as well, behavior that is as a result of regression must not be perceived as aggravation. It must be perceived as information. So when children or adults regress, as a parent, you must be able to look at their behavior as, what is this behavior trying to communicate with me? What is this behavior trying to tell me? Because if you overlook the cause of behavior, you are going to have a battle that you are not going to win with your child. And as a result, your child might not be able to bounce back to their appropriate age. Remember, regression is just a temporal thing. You regress temporarily to earlier stage of development. So if you don't have adult parents who are observing and looking at these factors, they might end up making things worse instead of helping you to get out of that regression in a positive and better way.
What are you finding some of the mitigation factors are that people are using to try and cope with this regression when it does trigger trauma for them? Are you finding that people are not going home for as long as 10, 15 days and rather maybe reducing the number of days that they're going to go home, perhaps maybe arriving on Christmas Eve and leaving on Boxing Day?
Yes. I think how people cope with regression is different. It depends on the individuals. But what I will say is people must be able to have self-awareness. They must be able to be aware of themselves in terms of how do they cope with regression. If you are in an environment where you can't take a walk and feel better when you come back, maybe it might be necessary not to spend too much time at home with your parents, because it triggers a lot of uncomfortable emotions. And sometimes, because now when we go home during this time of the year, there are so many events that we need to attend, family gatherings, and some of these gatherings may trigger you. This is where you need to have communication with your parents about the gatherings that you are not comfortable attending, because at the end of the day, people need to be encouraged to put themselves first, because you can't go to gatherings that you know very well that they will trigger certain emotions that you are not comfortable when you feel them.
We've seen a lot of that talk, particularly also on social media, where people are complaining that, you know, when they do go back home, and speaking of those gatherings that you speak of, there will be relatives, there will be family friends who will comment on things that you perhaps don't want to talk about, for instance, weight or your relationship status, or when are you having a child, and that kind of conversation that you may find triggering. How do people then protect themselves from that? Do you then not attend these gatherings that your family expects you to be at, and save your own mental health, or do you stick it through?
It will depend. Families differ. There are some families that can be toxic around these issues. But if you are fortunate enough coming from a family that is understanding, maybe beforehand you should discuss these issues with them, because most of us, we know what kind of questions and what kind of things that they normally say, and they trigger us to feel in a certain way. You discuss them with your parents or whoever is involved in
screen, so we can move to. Now, Andrew, let's talk about finances. You know, they do come into play. When we're growing up, the hierarchy is chronological order when it comes to age. But as you grow up, you also realize that the cousin who has a little bit more money may not be expected to do as many chores as the one who may be, let's say, unemployed. And how people are treated differently in different families according to how well they've done or perceived to have done?
Yeah, I think those are unhealthy family dynamics because finances must not be used as an excuse on how children must be treated at home, especially if you are a parent and you have about 3 children and 2 of them are working very well, they are earning much better, and the other one is unemployed, and as a result of that, the unemployed one will be treated so bad. These are unhealthy family dynamics that parents or the family as a collective need to find healthier ways of dealing with them. And if they can't deal with them themselves, maybe it's time they involve someone who is more objective to help them to deal with these issues, because these are some of the things that causes divisions in the families. Because let's say for the past 5 years, you have been unemployed, and as a result of that, you were given a lot of home chores. When there is an event, you must slaughter a cow, you must go and fetch water, and all those heavy house chores. And then 5 years later, you get a good job, you earn a lot of money. It's going to be difficult for you to embrace your family members or to actually help them with your resources because of how they treated you when you had nothing. So we must never use a status and money as terms and conditions of how we treat people. But I do understand that there are some families that are so toxic that they will treat people different on the basis of their financial muscles. These are things that need to be explored in the families. They need to be discouraged. And if possible, families can go and have family sessions with social workers, psychologists to try and resolve these issues, because they cause deep division, because even the children and the grandchildren that will come will be divided as a result of that ill treatment.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us. That was clinical social worker Andrew Kekae.